My name is Norma, and I'm 62 years old. I've lived in my Victorian home in the Boston suburbs for 35 years. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine my new daughter-in-law, Diana, would show up at my door with a notary announcing they'd sold my house and I was being shipped off to a nursing home. The look on her face when I calmly suggested we stop at the police station first was priceless. She had no idea I'd already sent them everything I discovered about her past. Before I share my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and if you appreciate real-life stories about standing up to manipulators, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to hear how I outsmarted someone who thought a 62-year-old widow would be an easy target. My husband Harold and I purchased our Victorian home in a quiet Boston suburb back in 1987. It wasn't much to look at initially, peeling wallpaper, creaky floors, and plumbing that seemed to have a mind of its own. But Harold was a talented architect with a vision. "This house has good bones, Norma," he would say, running his hands along the ornate wooden banister of the staircase. "It just needs someone to love it back to life." And love it we did. Over the next 3 decades, we poured our heart, souls, and a significant portion of our savings into restoring every inch of that 1890s beauty. Harold designed a stunning kitchen extension that maintained the home's historical integrity while adding modern functionality. I spent countless weekends stripping layers of paint from the intricate crown moldings, uncovering details that had been hidden for generations. Our home became our masterpiece. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a library with built-in bookshelves that Harold crafted himself, and a sunroom that captured the morning light perfectly. The garden, originally overgrown with weeds, transformed into my personal sanctuary, with rose bushes, a small pond, and a bench under the maple tree where Harold and I would enjoy our evening tea. By the time our neighborhood became one of Boston's most desirable suburbs, our house had tripled in value. But to us, its worth could never be measured in dollars alone. Every corner held memories. Christmas mornings with our son Thomas opening presents by the fireplace, summer barbecues with friends and neighbors, quiet evenings reading in the library as rain pattered against the windows. Harold and I had a beautiful life together. He was successful in his architectural firm, eventually becoming a partner while I worked as a children's librarian, a job I loved for its combination of books and bright young minds. We weren't wealthy by any stretch, but we were comfortable and, more importantly, happy. Thomas, our only child, was born in 1991, a curious boy with his father's analytical mind and, unfortunately, my stubbornness. As a child, he was constantly taking things apart to see how they worked: clocks, radios, eventually computers. By his teenage years, it was clear technology was his calling. While he struggled somewhat socially, always a bit awkward around his peers, he excelled academically and eventually earned a scholarship to study computer science at a good university. Our family wasn't perfect, of course. Thomas went through a rebellious phase in high school that tested our patience. Harold sometimes worked too much, missing school events that he later regretted. I could be overprotective, something both my husband and son frequently pointed out. But we loved each other fiercely, and that love saw us through the rough patches. When Harold was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in 2018, our world shattered. The disease moved quickly, giving us barely 6 months from diagnosis to the end. Those final months were a blur of hospital visits, medication schedules, and trying to make every remaining moment count. Thomas flew home from Seattle, where he had been working as a web developer, to be with us during his father's final weeks. I remember the last lucid conversation Harold and I had just days before he slipped into the morphine-induced haze that preceded his death. He held my hand, his once strong grip now frail and trembling. "Promise me you'll be okay, Norma," he whispered, his voice raspy from the oxygen tube. "Promise me you'll live your life fully, not just exist in this house with my ghost." "I promise," I told him, though I had no idea how I would keep that promise when the thought of life without him seemed impossible. Harold had always been meticulous about our finances. The house was fully paid off. We had decent savings, and his life insurance policy was substantial enough to ensure I wouldn't face financial hardship. He had even prepared a detailed file with all our important documents, account information, and instructions for handling various matters after his death. "You won't have to worry about money," he assured me during that final conversation. The house is yours free and clear. Our retirement savings should last if you're careful. And Thomas has his own life to build now. He doesn't need an inheritance. Just give him his grandfather's watch and my collection of first edition architecture books." After Harold passed, I existed in a fog of grief for nearly a year. Getting out of bed each morning was a victory. Making it through the day without breaking down in tears was an achievement. The house that had once been our sanctuary now felt cavernous and empty, filled with echoes of Harold's laughter and the phantom sound of his footsteps on the hardwood floors. Thomas stayed with me for a month after the funeral, but eventually had to return to his life in Seattle. He called regularly at first, but as time passed, the calls became less frequent. I understood. He was young, building his career, living his life. I didn't want to burden him with my grief or make him feel guilty for moving forward. About 2 years after Harold's death, I finally began to emerge from the worst of my grief. I started working part-time at the local library again, finding comfort in the familiar smell of books and the innocent questions of children. I joined a widow's support group where I found friendships with women who truly understood my experience. I even started dating the garden again, finding that the physical labor helped clear my mind. Thomas's life, meanwhile, seemed less stable. He called one evening to tell me he had lost his job at the tech startup where he'd been working. "Budget cuts," he explained vaguely. It wasn't the first time. Thomas had a pattern of jumping from job to job, never seeming to find his footing. He was brilliant with computers, but struggled with office politics and what he called pointless meetings. A month later, he called to ask if I could loan him money for rent. "Just until I land my next gig," he promised. "The job market is competitive right now." I sent him the money, of course, and again 3 months later, and again after that. I didn't mind financially. I had more than enough thanks to Harold's planning. What concerned me was the pattern. Thomas was 30, then 31, then 32, and still seemed to be floating, unable to find stability in his career or personal life. "Have you thought about moving back to Boston?" I suggested during one call. "The tech industry is booming here too, and you wouldn't have such high living expenses." "Maybe," he said noncommittally. "But Seattle feels like home now, and I'm seeing someone actually." This was news. Thomas had never been particularly forthcoming about his romantic life, and as far as I knew, his relationships tended to be brief and infrequent. "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased. "Tell me about her." "Her name's Diana," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "She's amazing, Mom. Smart, beautiful, successful. We met on a dating app a few weeks ago. She works in real estate." Over the next few calls, Thomas shared more about Diana. She was 29, originally from Florida, though she'd moved around a lot, independent, ambitious. She seemed to be everything I had hoped Thomas might find in a partner, someone stable who might help ground my perpetually unsettled son. Still, a small part of me worried about the speed of the relationship. Thomas had always been cautious, slow to trust, yet he spoke of Diana with an almost breathless admiration after just a few weeks of dating. I reminded myself that at 32, he was a grown man, capable of making his own decisions. And wasn't this what I had wanted for him? Someone to love, someone to build a life with. I'd love to meet her. I told Thomas during one of our calls. "Maybe you two could visit Boston sometime soon." "Actually," he replied, sounding excited, "we're thinking of flying out next month. Diana wants to see where I grew up, and I want her to meet you." As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I was eager to meet the woman who had captured my son's heart so quickly, yet something about the situation made me uneasy. Perhaps it was simply the protective instinct of a mother, or perhaps it was something more, a whisper of warning I couldn't quite hear. Either way, I pushed the feeling aside and began planning for their visit, determined to welcome the woman who might one day be my daughter-in-law into my home with open arms. Little did I know that opening my door to Diana would be the beginning of a nightmare I could never have anticipated. I still remember the day I first met Diana. It was a crisp October afternoon, and I had spent the morning baking Thomas's favorite chocolate chip cookies and preparing the guest room for their 3-day visit. When the doorbell rang, I smoothed my hair, straightened my sweater, and opened the front door with an eager smile. Thomas stood on the porch, looking happier than I had seen him in years, his arm around a striking young woman with long dark hair and the most penetrating green eyes I had ever seen. She was undeniably beautiful, tall and slender, dressed in an expensive-looking cream-colored coat and stiletto boots that made me wonder how she navigated the brick walkway leading to my door. "Mom," Thomas said, stepping forward to hug me. "This is Diana." Diana's smile was dazzling, her handshake firm and confident. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Norma," she said, her voice warm and melodious. "Thomas has told me so much about you." As I welcomed them inside, I noticed how Diana's eyes scanned the entry hall, lingering on the chandelier, the hardwood floors, the antique console table that had been in Harold's family for generations. There was something assessing in her gaze, almost calculating. "What a beautiful home," she remarked, running her hand along the mahogany banister. "Victorian, isn't it? Probably built around 1890. The craftsmanship is extraordinary." I was impressed by her knowledge. "That's exactly right. Harold and I spent years restoring it." "You have quite an eye," Thomas said proudly, squeezing her waist. "Well, real estate is my passion," Diana replied with a modest shrug. "I can't help but notice these things." Over tea in the living room, Diana charmed me with stories about her work in the luxury property market, her volunteer efforts with a housing charity, and her passion for historic architecture. She asked thoughtful questions about Harold, seeming genuinely interested in hearing about our life together. "And this house," she said, gesturing around the room, "it must be worth quite a bit in today's market. I imagine it's completely paid off." The question struck me as oddly personal, but I nodded. "Yes, Harold made sure of that before he passed." "Smart man," Diana said approvingly. "So many people in your generation are still carrying mortgages into retirement. It must give you such peace of mind knowing the house is entirely yours." Throughout the weekend, Diana continued to impress me with her attentiveness and charm. She insisted on helping with meal preparation, complimented my decorating choices, and listened to my stories with apparent fascination. Yet something about her attention felt performative, as if she were playing the role of the perfect potential daughter-in-law rather than simply being herself. I also noticed how often the conversation turned to financial matters: the value of homes in the neighborhood, Harold's life insurance policy, my retirement savings. Each time the questions were posed so casually, so naturally woven into the conversation that they didn't seem intrusive until I reflected on them later. "Do you have a will in place?" she asked over Sunday breakfast, spreading jam on her toast. "I only ask because Thomas and I were just talking about getting our affairs in order, young as we are. It's never too early to plan." "Yes, Harold and I took care of that years ago," I replied, increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of her questions. "And is Thomas your primary beneficiary?" she continued, not seeming to notice my discomfort. "I'm just curious about how these things typically work in families." Before I could answer, Thomas changed the subject, asking about plans for the day. I was grateful for the interruption, though, puzzled by Diana's interest in my estate planning. The most unsettling moment came on their final evening when Diana asked for a tour of the entire house. As we moved from room to room, she made comments that seemed oddly specific. This library would make an amazing home office. Those built-ins could be replaced with more modern shelving. "This smaller bedroom would be perfect as a nursery, don't you think? Though that wallpaper would have to go. The primary bathroom is a bit dated. Buyers these days expect spa-like features." "Buyers?" I echoed, confused. Diana laughed lightly. "Oh, I'm just speaking from my real estate experience. I can't help thinking about potential improvements." As they prepared to leave the next morning, Diana hugged me tightly. "Thank you for a lovely weekend, Norma. I feel like I'm already part of the family." Just 6 weeks later, Thomas called with startling news. "Mom, Diana and I are engaged." The announcement left me speechless. They had known each other for barely 3 months. When I gently suggested they might consider a longer engagement, Thomas became defensive. "When you know, Mom. Diana is everything I've been looking for. We want to start our life together as soon as possible." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Diana took charge of wedding planning, opting for a small ceremony just 2 months later. Nothing extravagant, she explained during a rare phone call. Just close family and a few friends. I offered to help with arrangements to contribute financially, but Diana politely declined. We want to keep it intimate. And actually, I think we'll have the ceremony at the courthouse with just a small dinner after. But what about your family? I asked, realizing I knew almost nothing about Diana's background. Won't they want to attend? My parents are living abroad right now, she said vaguely. Australia. The timing just doesn't work for them to fly back. Over the next weeks, I noticed Thomas becoming increasingly distant. Our regular calls dwindled to brief, hurried conversations in which he seemed distracted and eager to end the call. When I mentioned visiting before the wedding, he was evasive. We're just so busy, Mom. Diana's work schedule is packed and I'm interviewing for a new position. Maybe after the wedding things will calm down. The few times I did speak with him, Thomas sounded strangely anxious, his usual thoughtful manner replaced by quick, almost rehearsed responses. When I asked direct questions about Diana's family or their plans after marriage, he deflected or changed the subject. A week before the wedding, I tried calling one of Thomas's oldest friends, Brian, hoping for some insight. The call went to voicemail, and when Brian finally returned it days later, he sounded confused. Wedding. What wedding? I haven't spoken to Thomas in months. Every time I call, he says he's busy with Diana. I wasn't even invited. This revelation disturbed me deeply. Thomas and Brian had been friends since college, practically inseparable for years. The idea that Brian wasn't invited to the wedding, or worse, didn't even know about it, sent a chill down my spine. The courthouse wedding was as small as Diana had described. Just me, the couple, and two people Diana introduced as colleagues from work, who served as witnesses. Thomas seemed tense throughout the brief ceremony, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Diana, by contrast, was radiant, her green eyes gleaming with triumph as the judge pronounced them husband and wife. At the small dinner afterward at an upscale restaurant, Diana dominated the conversation, speaking about their plans to build a future together. Thomas nodded along, occasionally squeezing her hand, but contributing little. As I hugged my son goodbye that evening, I whispered, "Are you happy, Thomas? Really happy?" He hesitated just a fraction too long before answering, "Of course, Mom, Diana's amazing." But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even fear, that haunted me as I drove back to my empty house that night. In the days that followed, my unease grew. Thomas and Diana had gone on a brief honeymoon to a resort in Florida. Upon their return, they seemed to avoid my calls and invitations. When I did manage to reach Thomas, the conversations were brief and superficial, with Diana often audible in the background, prompting his responses. One evening, about 3 weeks after the wedding, my neighbor Martin stopped by with a basket of tomatoes from his garden. Martin was a retired police detective who had moved next door shortly after Harold passed away. Over the past few years, he had become a good friend, often checking in on me and helping with household repairs. "Everything okay, Norma?" he asked as we sat on the porch. "You seem distracted lately." Perhaps it was the genuine concern in his voice, or perhaps I simply needed to voice my worries to someone, but I found myself sharing the whole story. Thomas's whirlwind romance, Diana's odd questions, the rushed wedding, and my growing sense that something wasn't right. Martin listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, he set down his coffee cup with deliberation. "Norma," he said carefully, "I don't want to alarm you, but this situation raises some red flags for me. I've seen similar patterns in my years on the force, usually in cases involving elder exploitation." His words sent a chill through me. "You think Diana is, trying to take advantage of Thomas of me?" Martin shrugged. "I can't say for sure. But the speed of the relationship, the isolation of Thomas from friends and family, the interest in your financial situation and property, these are warning signs." "What should I do?" I asked, feeling suddenly vulnerable in a way I hadn't since Harold's death. "Information is power," Martin said firmly. "I think we need to learn more about this Diana. Do you know her full name, where she worked before meeting Thomas?" I realized with shame how little I actually knew about the woman who had become my daughter-in-law. Diana Carlisle, at least that's her name now. She said she worked for a luxury real estate firm in Seattle, but I don't know which one. Martin nodded thoughtfully. That's a start. Let me do some digging, Norma. In the meantime, keep things normal with Thomas and Diana. Don't raise suspicions. As Martin left, I felt a conflicting mix of emotions. Relief at having shared my concerns, fear about what he might discover, and a deep, aching worry for my son. That night, I lay awake wondering if I was overreacting, if my maternal instinct was creating problems where none existed. But the memory of Diana's calculating eyes as she assessed my home and Thomas's uncharacteristic behavior kept me from dismissing my concerns entirely. Little did I know that my instincts were not only correct, but had underestimated the danger we were facing. Diana wasn't simply a gold digger looking to secure a comfortable future through marriage. She was something far more dangerous, a practiced predator with a history of destruction, and my family was her latest target. The morning after my conversation with Martin, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop, determined to do some investigating of my own. If Diana truly worked in luxury real estate, as she claimed, there should be some online presence, a professional profile listings under her name, perhaps even reviews from clients. I started by searching Diana Carlisle Real Estate Seattle, expecting to find a professional website or at least a profile on a brokerage site. Instead, the search yielded nothing relevant. I tried variations. Diana Carlisle Realtor, Diana Carlisle Property, but found no professional trace of my new daughter-in-law in the real estate world. This was odd. In today's digital age, anyone working in sales, particularly luxury real estate, would have a substantial online footprint. I broadened my search to social media, finding only a sparse Facebook profile that had been created less than a year ago with few posts and fewer friends. The profile picture was indeed Diana, but the information was minimal. No employment history, no education details, just a current city of Seattle. I sat back troubled by this lack of information. Either Diana was unusually private for a sales professional or something didn't add up. My phone rang, startling me. It was Martin. "Norma, I've found some interesting information," he said without preamble. "Are you free for me to stop by in about an hour?" When Martin arrived, he carried a manila folder and wore the serious expression I imagined he had used during his detective days. We settled in my living room, and he opened the folder, revealing several printed pages. "I still have contacts in law enforcement," he began. "I asked a friend to run a background check on Diana Carlisle. The results were concerning." He laid out the first document, a list of names with dates beside them. Diana Carlisle appears to be her current legal name, but she's used several others over the past decade. Diana Wells, Diana Thompson, Diana Rodriguez. "Different marriages?" I asked, trying to process this information. Martin shook his head. "Not all of them. Some appear to be aliases used for different jobs or situations. And here's where it gets interesting. Under the name Diana Wells, she has a record." He showed me a printout of a court record from Florida, dated 4 years earlier. Diana Wells had been charged with fraud and theft by deception in a case involving an elderly man named Robert Jenkins. She had pleaded down to a misdemeanor and received probation. The case was relatively minor in legal terms. She convinced this man to invest in a fake property development. But my contact found a pattern of similar complaints across different states, though most didn't result in charges. I felt sick as Martin continued showing me credit reports indicating Diana was deeply in debt with multiple maxed-out credit cards, personal loans, and collection actions against her. There was no evidence she had ever held a real estate license in any state. "She's essentially living on credit and running from creditors," Martin explained. "My guess is she uses men like Thomas to maintain her lifestyle until she can find a bigger target." "Like me," I said quietly, the pieces falling into place. "My house, my savings." Martin nodded grimly. "You're likely the real prize here, Norma. A valuable property, no mortgage, presumably some savings and investments from Harold. From a predator's perspective, you're an attractive target, a widow living alone in a valuable home." My hand trembled as I set down my teacup. "But why marry Thomas? Why not just try to con me directly?" "Marriage provides legal advantages," Martin explained. "As your son's wife, she gains certain rights and influences. If something were to happen to you, Thomas would inherit. As his wife, she'd have access to those assets. And she can use Thomas to manipulate you. Most parents won't refuse their children, especially when pressured. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Martin quickly gathered the papers back into the folder as I went to answer. To my surprise, a young woman I'd never seen before stood on my porch. She appeared to be in her early 30s, professionally dressed, but visibly nervous. "Mrs. Wilson." "Norma Wilson," she asked, glancing over her shoulder as if worried about being followed. "My name is Catherine Jenkins. I need to talk to you about Diana Carlisle. It's important." The surname Jenkins immediately connected to the court documents Martin had just shown me. I invited her in, introduced Martin, and offered her tea, which she declined with a shaking hand. "I don't have much time," Catherine said, perching on the edge of my sofa. "I found you through a mutual connection, Brian Thomas's friend. When he mentioned Thomas had suddenly married someone named Diana, I had a terrible feeling it might be the same woman who destroyed my father's life." Over the next 30 minutes, Catherine shared a chilling story. 4 years earlier, her father, Robert Jenkins, a 68-year-old widower, had met Diana Wells at a community center in Tampa. Within months, Diana had moved into his home, isolated him from family, and convinced him to invest in non-existent property developments. By the time Catherine realized what was happening, Diana had drained nearly $200,000 from her father's retirement accounts. We pressed charges, but she had covered her tracks well. The prosecutor could only make a minor fraud charge stick. She got probation and disappeared. Dad was never the same, not just financially but emotionally. The betrayal broke something in him. Catherine pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of Diana with her father. Unmistakably, the same woman who had married my son, though with lighter hair and different makeup. When I heard about Thomas's sudden marriage, I did some digging. The description matched, and when I saw a photo on Brian's phone, she shuddered. "It's her. She's using the same playbook she used with my dad. Charm, isolation, financial questions, rushing the relationship." "Have you gone to the police?" Martin asked. Catherine's expression hardened. "With what?" "She served her probation. The charges were relatively minor. And technically she hasn't done anything illegal to Thomas or Norma yet. The police can't act on a pattern of suspicious behavior." "So why come to me?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "To warn you," Catherine said simply. "I couldn't save my father from her, but maybe I can help prevent her from hurting another family. She's dangerous, Mrs. Wilson. Not physically violent, but emotionally and financially devastating. Whatever she's planning, you need to be prepared." After Catherine left, providing her contact information and promising to share any additional information she might discover, Martin and I sat in stunned silence. "What do I do now?" I finally asked. "How do I protect Thomas? How do I protect myself?" Martin's expression was grim but determined. "First, we need more evidence. Catherine's story corroborates our suspicions, but we need concrete proof of Diana's current intentions. Then we need to document everything and take appropriate precautions." Over the next 2 weeks, I became something I never imagined, a spy in my own life. With Martin's guidance, I installed a small security system that included cameras covering the exterior of my home. I gathered and secured all important documents, deed to the house insurance policies, investment accounts, will, making copies that I stored with my lawyer. I also began recording all phone conversations with Thomas and Diana, which was legal in our state. The few calls that connected revealed troubling patterns. Diana controlling the conversation, Thomas sounding increasingly distant and anxious, vague references to changes and new arrangements they were considering. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. I had been trying to reach Thomas for days with no success when my phone rang with his number. When I answered, however, I heard only background noise. He had apparently pocket-dialed me accidentally. I was about to hang up when I heard Diana's voice clear and cold, nothing like the warm tone she had used with me. "The lawyer says we need her signature to do anything with the house," Diana was saying to someone. "But once we get her to sign over power of attorney, we can handle everything. The nursing home has an opening next month." A male voice I didn't recognize responded, "And if she refuses to sign?" Diana laughed a chilling sound. "She won't. Thomas will convince her it's for her own good that she can't manage alone anymore. We'll say all the right things about visiting every day, about how much better it will be for her. They always fall for it. I recorded the entire conversation, my heart pounding so loudly I feared they would somehow hear it through the phone. When the call finally ended, I immediately contacted Martin, forwarding him the recording. "This is exactly what we needed," he said after listening. "This clearly demonstrates intent. I think it's time to contact the authorities." That evening, I sent a detailed email to the local police department, attaching the recording, Catherine's statement, Martin's findings, and my own documentation of Diana's suspicious behavior. I included all contact information and requested to speak with someone from their elder fraud division. The response came the next morning. A detective, Sandra Morris, would be handling the case and wanted to meet with me. We arranged a meeting for later that day at a coffee shop away from my neighborhood where there was little chance of running into Thomas or Diana. Detective Morris was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened carefully to my story, taking detailed notes. "We take elder exploitation very seriously," she assured me. "The evidence you've provided gives us enough to open an investigation, but we need to be strategic about how we proceed." She advised me to continue as normal, not to confront Diana or Thomas yet, but to be prepared for them to make their move. "Based on the recording, they're planning to approach you soon about power of attorney and the nursing home. When they do, we need to be ready." "What should I do when they come?" I asked, feeling a mix of fear and determination. "Call us immediately," she instructed, providing her direct number. "We'll want to document the interaction, possibly have officers nearby. And Norma, don't sign anything no matter what they say." I left that meeting feeling both terrified and empowered. Diana was indeed planning to take everything from me, using my own son as her tool. But now I knew, and knowledge was power. I would not be her victim. 2 days later, my security system alerted me to movement on my front porch. Through the app on my phone, I watched as Thomas and Diana approached my door, accompanied by a professional-looking man carrying a briefcase. The moment I had been preparing for had arrived sooner than expected. With shaking fingers, I sent a quick text to Detective Morris. "They're here, with someone official-looking." Then I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and went to answer the door, prepared to confront the woman who thought she could steal my life and my son from right under my nose. I opened the door to find Thomas standing slightly behind Diana, his expression a mixture of discomfort and resignation. Diana wore a professional-looking navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail projecting an image of polished efficiency. Beside them stood a balding man in his 50s, clutching a leather portfolio whom Diana introduced as Mr. Phelps, our notary. "Norma, what a lovely surprise to see you at home," Diana said with practiced warmth, though her eyes remained cold. "We were hoping to catch you. May we come in? We have some important matters to discuss." I forced a smile and stepped aside to let them enter, noting how Thomas avoided eye contact, his usual warm hug replaced by an awkward nod. As they settled in my living room, Diana taking charge and directing the notary to the dining table to set up his paperwork, I sent another discreet text to Detective Morris. "Inside now, notary present." "Can I offer anyone coffee?" I asked, buying time while I assessed the situation. "No need for that," Diana replied briskly. "This won't take long. We have some documents for you to sign, Norma. Good news, actually." "Oh." I kept my voice neutral, though my heart was racing. "What kind of documents?" Diana gestured to Thomas, apparently expecting him to take the lead, but when he remained silent, she continued smoothly. "Well, Thomas and I have been discussing your living situation. This big house, all the maintenance, the stairs, it's really not ideal for someone your age living alone." "I manage just fine," I replied mildly. "For now, perhaps," Diana said with a condescending smile. "But we need to think about the future, which is why we found a wonderful solution." She nodded to the notary, who began spreading documents across my dining table. I glimpsed the words power of attorney on one form and property transfer on another. "We've been in touch with Evergreen Meadows." Diana continued, referring to an assisted living facility on the outskirts of town. "They have an immediate opening in their independent living section. It's perfect for you. A small apartment, meals provided, activities, medical staff on site. No more worrying about home repairs or cooking or yard work. And my house? I asked, already knowing the answer, but wanting to hear her say it. Diana's smile widened. That's the best part. We've already found a buyer. The market is hot right now, and we received an excellent offer. Once you sign these papers, everything will be taken care of. The proceeds from the sale will cover your stay at Evergreen Meadows for years to come. I see, I said slowly, looking at Thomas. And this is what you want, son. Thomas finally met my eyes, and what I saw there broke my heart. Not malice or greed, but fear. It's for the best, Mom, he said, his voice flat as if reciting lines. Diana and I have discussed it thoroughly. The house is too much for you. When would I need to move? I asked, maintaining my calm facade while inwardly reeling at their audacity. That's the thing. Diana interjected, a hint of impatience creeping into her voice. The buyers need to close quickly. We'll help you pack this weekend and you'll move to Evergreen on Monday. They're holding the spot for you, but we need to confirm today. I walked slowly to the dining table, examining the papers without touching them. So to be clear, you've sold my house, which is solely in my name, without my knowledge or consent. You've arranged for me to move to a facility I've never seen or agreed to, and you need me to sign these documents immediately to make it all legal. The notary shifted uncomfortably, looking between Diana and me. Diana's expression hardened slightly, though her smile remained fixed. We're trying to help you, Norma. The house is too much responsibility at your age, and as Thomas's wife, I'm just looking out for his mother's best interests. I turned to Thomas. Is that how you see it, Thomas? You're helping me by selling my home from under me. Thomas flushed, avoiding my gaze again. Mom, please don't make this difficult. Diana has put a lot of effort into arranging everything. Evergreen Meadows is a nice place. You'll be comfortable there. And what about my belongings, my memories, the home your father and I built together? I asked, my voice steady, despite the anger and hurt churning inside me. You can take personal items, of course, Diana said dismissively. The buyers want the house furnished, so that simplifies things. We thought you'd appreciate not having to deal with all that. The notary cleared his throat. Perhaps Mrs. Wilson would like time to review the documents, he suggested tentatively. There's no time for that, Diana said sharply. The buyers have given us a deadline. The papers need to be signed today. I looked at the documents again, noting power of attorney forms that would give Thomas, and by extension Diana, complete control over my financial and medical decisions. The property transfer appeared to allocate only a small portion of the proceeds to my care, with the bulk going to an account in both Thomas and Diana's names. I took a deep breath, made my decision, and reached for my purse. Well, this is certainly a surprise, but I understand you're trying to help. Before we sign anything, though, I need to make a quick stop. Diana looked suspicious. A stop where? At the police station, I said calmly, to change my address officially. If I'm moving to Evergreen, I should update my information with the authorities right away. We can do that on the way, can't we? In fact, it's perfect timing. I told them I'd be stopping by today anyway to follow up on some information I sent them about you, Diana. The color drained from Diana's face. Information? What information? Oh, just some interesting documents about your past activities in Florida. Your work with Robert Jenkins, for instance. His daughter Catherine was very helpful in filling in the details. Diana's composure cracked. Catherine Jenkins. You've been talking to Catherine Jenkins. Thomas looked between us, clearly confused. Who's Catherine Jenkins? Diana, what is she talking about? I held Diana's gaze steadily. Should I tell him, or would you prefer to explain how you defrauded Catherine's elderly father before moving on to your next victim? Or perhaps you'd like to explain the conversation I overheard where you discussed putting me in a nursing home and taking control of my assets. This is ridiculous, Diana sputtered, turning to Thomas. Your mother is confused, delusional even. This is exactly why she needs professional care. But Thomas was staring at his wife with growing suspicion. Diana, what is she talking about? You told me Evergreen was Mom's idea, that she had mentioned wanting to downsize. She's lying to manipulate you, Diana snapped. You know how mothers can be. She probably can't stand the thought of you having a life with me away from her control. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, pulling up the recording app. Would you like to hear your own words, Diana? I accidentally recorded quite an illuminating conversation between you and your associate a few days ago. Something about getting me to sign power of attorney and handling everything once I was in the nursing home. The notary stood abruptly, gathering his papers. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I was told this was a straightforward property transfer with the owner's full knowledge and consent. I don't feel comfortable proceeding under these circumstances. Mr. Phelps, sit down, Diana ordered. We're completing this transaction today as planned. The notary shook his head. I'm sorry, but I cannot and will not notarize documents under these conditions. This appears to potentially involve elder abuse, which I am legally obligated to report. As the notary moved toward the door, Diana lunged for my phone. Give me that recording, she demanded. Her carefully constructed facade completely collapsed. Thomas stepped between us. Diana, stop. What the hell is going on here? What have you done? Diana's eyes darted between Thomas and me, calculations clearly running behind them. She switched tactics, her expression suddenly vulnerable, tears filling her eyes. Thomas, your mother is trying to come between us. She's making up these accusations because she can't stand to see you happy with someone else. You know how she's always controlled you, kept you dependent on her. Thomas hesitated, and for a moment I feared Diana's manipulation might work, but then his expression hardened. My mother has never been controlling. She supported me my entire life, even when I didn't deserve it. He turned to me. Mom, I need to know the truth. All of it. Your wife isn't who she claims to be, I said gently. She has a history of targeting vulnerable people for financial gain. She's used multiple names, has a criminal record for fraud in Florida, and is currently in serious debt. I have documentation of all of this. She's lying! Diana shrieked, abandoning all pretense of composure. Thomas stared at her, really seeing her perhaps for the first time. Then prove her wrong. Explain the nursing home conversation she recorded. Explain who Katherine Jenkins is and why her name made you panic. Diana's face contorted with rage. You stupid, pathetic man. Do you think I would have looked twice at you if it weren't for your mother's house? Do you know how hard I've worked to set this up to tolerate your boring stories and insecurities? This was supposed to be simple. We get married, I help you convince your lonely old mother to sign over her assets, we sell the house and move on. The naked contempt in her voice seemed to physically strike Thomas. He stumbled back, his face pale with shock. You never loved me. Any of it. It was all about the money. Of course it was about the money, Diana spat. Look at you. No career stability, no ambition, no backbone. What else could you possibly offer? As Thomas absorbed this brutal assessment, the doorbell rang. I moved to answer it, relieved to find Detective Morris and a uniformed officer standing on my porch. Perfect timing, I said, gesturing them inside. Things have escalated rather quickly. Diana froze at the sight of the police, her eyes darting toward the back door as if considering flight. Detective Morris assessed the situation at a glance. Diana Carlisle, she said formally. I'm Detective Morris with the Financial Crimes Unit. We'd like to ask you some questions regarding allegations of attempted elder fraud and exploitation. This is absurd, Diana blustered, though her voice lacked conviction. I've done nothing illegal. This is a family misunderstanding. Then you won't mind answering our questions, Detective Morris replied evenly. We also have some inquiries about your activities in Florida under the name Diana Wells, and similar incidents in Arizona and Nevada under other aliases. As the detective continued outlining the allegations against her, Diana's defiance crumbled. The uniformed officer discreetly positioned himself between her and the exits. Thomas stood in shocked silence, watching as the woman he had married just weeks earlier was revealed as a calculating predator who had targeted him solely as a path to his mother's assets. Thomas, Diana said desperately, trying one last manipulation. Don't let them do this to us. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Tell them your mother is confused, that we were trying to help her. But Thomas shook his head slowly, the painful truth finally clear to him. No, Diana. The only one confused was me. I trusted you. I loved you. And you used me to try to steal from my mother. As Detective Morris led Diana away for formal questioning, warning her that charges would likely follow based on the evidence already gathered, Thomas collapsed onto the sofa, his head in his hands. "Mom," he choked out. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. She told me you had mentioned wanting to move to a smaller place, that you were struggling with the house. I should have talked to you directly. I should have seen through her." I sat beside him, placing my hand on his shoulder. "Con artists are professionals, Thomas. Diana knew exactly what to say, how to manipulate, how to come between us. You're not the first to be deceived, and sadly, you won't be the last." As my son broke down in tears of shame and betrayal, I held him close, relieved that we had escaped Diana's plan, but heartsick at the pain she had caused. The house around us, the home Harold and I had lovingly built, the home Diana had coveted enough to orchestrate this elaborate deception, stood solid and unchanged, a testament to the fact that while Diana had temporarily damaged our family, she had failed to destroy what mattered most, the truth, and our bond as mother and son. The weeks following Diana's arrest were difficult for both Thomas and me. The public humiliation of having been taken in by a con artist, the legal proceedings that followed, and the painful process of untangling the brief marriage left my son emotionally devastated and withdrawn. At my insistence, Thomas moved back into his childhood bedroom temporarily. "Just until you get your feet under you again," I told him, concerned about his mental state. He agreed without argument, seemingly relieved not to face his apartment in Seattle, where Diana's presence still lingered in the furnishings they had chosen together, the photographs on the walls, even the coffee mugs in the kitchen cabinets. Detective Morris kept us informed as the investigation progressed. Diana had indeed been operating under various aliases for years, moving from state to state to avoid detection. The pattern was always similar: identify vulnerable individuals with assets, establish relationships of trust, manipulate them into signing over control of their finances or property, then disappear with the proceeds. "You're actually quite fortunate," Detective Morris told us during one of her visits. "Most of Diana's victims don't realize what's happening until it's too late, when their accounts are drained or their properties sold. Your suspicions and quick action prevented her from causing irreparable damage." Thomas sat silently during these conversations, the dark circles under his eyes testament to his sleepless nights and emotional turmoil. The Diana he had fallen in love with, warm, supportive, seemingly devoted, had been a carefully crafted fiction. Every tender moment, every shared dream for the future, had been calculated steps in her scheme to access my assets through him. The psychological manipulation in these cases is sophisticated, Detective Morris explained, gently noting Thomas's distress. Con artists like Diana are experts at identifying vulnerabilities and exploiting them. Thomas, you were targeted precisely because of your close relationship with your mother and your naturally trusting nature. This isn't a reflection on your intelligence or judgment. But Thomas couldn't forgive himself so easily. "I brought her into our lives," he said one evening after Detective Morris had left. "I gave her access to you, to our family. If you hadn't been so observant, if Martin hadn't helped, if Catherine hadn't come forward, I can't bear to think what might have happened." "But none of those things happened," I reminded him, squeezing his hand. "We caught her in time, and now we have the chance to make sure she can't do this to anyone else." The district attorney built a strong case against Diana, combining the evidence from our situation with testimony from previous victims, including Catherine Jenkins and her father. Diana initially pleaded not guilty, maintaining her innocence with the same convincing performance that had charmed Thomas and countless others. But faced with mounting evidence and the possibility of a lengthy sentence, she eventually accepted a plea deal on multiple counts of fraud, attempted elder abuse, and identity theft. The plea agreement spared us the ordeal of a trial, but the legal proceedings still dragged on for months. During this time, Diana continued her manipulative tactics, alternating between threatening letters to Thomas, claiming he had been complicit and would go down with her, and tearful phone calls declaring that her love had been real and she had been misunderstood. "Block her number," Martin advised when Thomas showed me the increasingly desperate voicemails. "She's trying to maintain control, even from custody. Don't give her that power." Thomas followed this advice, but the emotional damage had been done. He withdrew from friends, took a leave of absence from his latest job, and spent days in his room, emerging only for meals that he barely touched. I worried constantly, remembering how vibrant and enthusiastic he had been before Diana entered our lives. "Give him time," my friend Elaine counseled during one of our regular coffee dates. Elaine had become a pillar of support throughout the ordeal, bringing casseroles when I was too exhausted to cook, sitting with me during my own moments of doubt and guilt. Betrayal like this shakes your fundamental trust in your own judgment. He's questioning every decision, every instinct now. "I just want my son back," I confessed, tears welling in my eyes. Not just physically in the house, but the Thomas who laughed easily, who got excited about new tech projects, who called just to chat about his day. "He'll find his way back," Elaine assured me. "With your support and professional help, he'll heal." Taking Elaine's implied suggestion, I gently broached the subject of therapy with Thomas. To my surprise, he agreed readily. "I need to understand how I could have been so blind," he said, "and I need to make sure it never happens again." Dr. Samantha Lee, a therapist specializing in trauma and relationship abuse, began meeting with Thomas twice weekly. Gradually, I noticed small improvements. He started joining me for evening walks around the neighborhood, volunteered to help with dinner preparation, occasionally mentioned an article he had read or a documentary he had watched. 4 months after Diana's arrest, Thomas received the final divorce decree. The marriage had been brief enough that disentangling their limited shared assets was relatively straightforward. Diana had attempted to claim a portion of my house through her brief marriage to Thomas, but the judge had dismissed this claim outright, given the clear evidence of fraudulent intent. That evening, Thomas and I sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was the first truly warm day of spring, and the garden was beginning to show signs of new life. Daffodils pushing through the soil buds forming on the rose bushes Harold and I had planted decades ago. "I've been offered a job," Thomas said, suddenly breaking a comfortable silence. "A tech startup in Boston. Good salary, interesting project, solid funding." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased at this sign of him looking toward the future. "When would you start?" 2 weeks, he replied, then hesitated. "It means moving out. I know we haven't really discussed how long I'd be staying here." "This has always been your home, Thomas," I said softly. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need, but if you're ready for a fresh start, I understand that too." He nodded, watching a robin hop across the lawn. "Dr. Lee thinks it would be good for me to get back to independence, to prove to myself that I can trust my decisions again. But I won't go if you're not comfortable being alone after everything that's happened." I felt a surge of maternal pride at his consideration, at this evidence that beneath the trauma Diana had inflicted, my thoughtful son remained. "I've been alone for years, Thomas. I'm quite capable of taking care of myself, as recent events have proven rather definitively." I smiled to soften the words. "Besides, Boston is only a 30-minute drive. We can see each other regularly without sharing a bathroom." Thomas laughed, a sound I had missed desperately. "Fair point." He paused, his expression growing serious again. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how easily Diana came between us. I should have seen the red flags when she started discouraging me from calling you, when she insisted on being present during our conversations." "We both missed signs we should have seen," I acknowledged. "I should have been more direct about my concerns instead of investigating behind your back." "You were trying to protect me while respecting my independence," Thomas said. "I understand that now. And honestly, if you had confronted me directly, I probably wouldn't have believed you. Diana had me completely convinced that her intentions were pure." The conversation continued as darkness fell, both of us speaking more openly than we had in months, perhaps years. Thomas shared the shame he felt at having been duped, the anger that sometimes overwhelmed him when he thought of Diana's calculated deception, and the fear that he might never trust his own judgment in relationships again. In turn, I confessed my own fears during the ordeal. Not just for my home and financial security, but for him, for the damage I knew would be inflicted when the truth about Diana was revealed. We talked about Harold, about how much we both still missed him, and how his steady presence might have changed the course of events with Diana. "Dad would have seen through her immediately," Thomas said with certainty. "He always had a knack for reading people." Perhaps. I agreed, though privately I wondered. Diana had been exceptionally skilled at creating exactly the persona her targets wanted to see, Even Martin, with his years of law enforcement experience, had needed concrete evidence before confirming his suspicions. In the 6 months that followed, our lives gradually found a new rhythm. Thomas moved to Boston for his new job and began rebuilding his social connections, including rekindling his friendship with Brian. He came for dinner every Sunday, sometimes bringing colleagues or new friends, filling the dining room with conversation and laughter that had been absent for too long. I joined a support group for victims of fraud and exploitation, finding unexpected comfort in sharing my experience with others who truly understood the unique mix of emotions: violation, embarrassment, anger, and ultimately empowerment in having fought back. Through this group, I met others who had encountered Diana under her various aliases, including an elderly couple who had lost their retirement savings to her investment scheme in Nevada. Together with Catherine Jenkins and several other victims, we provided impact statements for Diana's sentencing hearing. The judge, clearly moved by the testimonies of lives disrupted and trust shattered, sentenced her to 8 years in prison with no possibility of parole until at least half the sentence was served. "It doesn't undo the damage," Catherine said as we left the courthouse together. "But knowing she can't hurt anyone else for years gives me some peace. And perhaps it sends a message that we take these crimes seriously." I agreed, feeling a complex mix of emotions as I watched Diana being led away in handcuffs. There was no joy in seeing another human being imprisoned, even one who had caused such pain. But there was a sense of justice served of vulnerability, transformed into strength through action. 1 year after Diana's arrest, I hosted a small gathering in my garden. Thomas Martin and his wife Elaine Catherine Jenkins, who had become a dear friend, Detective Morris, who had recently been promoted, and several members of my support group. It wasn't a celebration exactly, but an acknowledgement of how far we had all come, of the healing that had taken place. As I looked around at the faces of these people who had helped me through the darkest period since Harold's death, I felt immense gratitude. Diana had entered our lives intending to take everything I valued: my home, my security, my relationship with my son. Instead, she had inadvertently given me a renewed appreciation for the strength of community, for the power of truth, and for my own resilience. Thomas approached me as the party wound down, the evening air growing cool. "I have something to tell you," he said, a hint of nervous excitement in his voice. "I've met someone. Her name is Rachel. She's a graphic designer at a firm near my office. We've been dating for a couple of months, taking things very slowly." I searched his face, seeing happiness there, but also caution, the hard-earned wisdom that comes from painful experience. "She sounds lovely. I'd like to meet her when you're ready." "That's just it," Thomas replied. "I'm bringing her to dinner next Sunday. But Mom, I want you to know, I've learned my lesson. We're getting to know each other gradually, sharing our histories, honestly, meeting each other's friends and family. No rushing, no grand declarations, just building trust day by day." I squeezed his hand, my heart full. That sounds like the beginning of something real. As our guests departed, and Thomas helped me clear the last of the glasses and plates, I paused to look at my home in the soft evening light. This house that Diana had coveted, that she had tried to take through manipulation and deceit, remained a sanctuary, perhaps even more so now that it had weathered this storm. The experience had changed us, certainly. I was more cautious now, more aware of the potential for deception behind charming facades. Thomas was more thoughtful in his relationships, more deliberate in his choices. But we had not allowed Diana's actions to harden us into cynicism or permanent distrust. Instead, we had learned to balance openness with wisdom, to recognize that while not everyone has ulterior motives, healthy skepticism and clear boundaries are valuable protections. In the end, Diana's attempt to exploit what she perceived as vulnerability in an aging widow had revealed instead the strength that comes with experience with community and with the courage to face uncomfortable truths. She had underestimated not just me, but the network of people who cared enough to help expose her scheme before it succeeded. There is power in those connections, in friendships maintained over decades, in neighbors who notice when something seems wrong, in children who may be temporarily led astray, but find their way back to the truth. Diana never understood that genuine relationships built on mutual respect and honest care are far stronger than the artificial bonds created through manipulation and deception. As I prepare to meet Rachel next Sunday, I find myself hopeful for Thomas's future. The pain Diana caused will always be part of his story, part of our family history. But it will not be the defining chapter. Instead, it has become a lesson in resilience, in the importance of trusting one's instincts, and in the healing power of honest connection. Have you ever had to trust your gut feeling when something didn't seem right about a person or situation? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story helped you recognize the warning signs of potential fraud or manipulation, please like and subscribe to help others access this information. Share this video with someone you care about who might benefit from understanding how predators like Diana operate. And remember, in protecting yourself and your loved ones, knowledge truly is power. Thank you for listening to my story. May it serve as both a warning and a reminder that even in our most vulnerable moments, we have more strength than we realize.